Hello and welcome to the Civilization V Battle Royale X Mark V, Episode 23, The Corrupt Cycle. That which has been is being, and shall be once more, and once more, and once more, and once more, and once more. Ahoy hoy friends, and welcome back to the Civ Battle Royale Mark V. ECH here, the boy who fills up the sub with stats posts and the Schoolhouse documentary series, when I remember. Sorry. Here to complete a triumvirate and become the supreme CBR sub-denizen. Mwahaha! Ahem. I mean, here to have some fun looking at these silly civs do stupid moves. Yep. In seriousness, the cylinder stands at the dawn of a widespread modernity, creating a good deal of opportunity and risk alike. Now, having written a good few narrations over the season, I must warn in advance that I very much have a habit of using these as sporadic creative writing sessions. I'm well aware that not everyone is into that, so when I get properly fanficky, I'll be sure to leave a line between the prose and the analysis, so feel free to just scroll on down if you prefer. On with the show. I wanted to use the OC Spotlight slots to shout out the wonderful audio narrators the CBR has been blessed with over its lifetime, in particular, the two who have devoted time to this season. First, denizens of the sub may have seen that Doc Ito, our primary narrator since the start of X3, has had to step aside to handle real-life matters recently. I cannot begin to thank them enough for the effort they put into this niche community, and I sincerely wish them the best. P.S. They did have a little tip jar Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/DocIto. Just saying. However, because this community is apparently just stuffed with part-time heroes, another channel has already stepped in to narrate from here. In Yokel, who previous did the even more niche than regular CBR auto narrations power ranking audio narrations, which, to be clear, I applaud them for doing, has already added 2 more episodes to the audio medium, and I can't wait to torture them with my overlong text. I mean, hear them speak these words. Check them out. Oh, thank you. And who said we live in a time devoid of heroes? Zazao was the biggest mover and shaker of this week's PRs, and not in the swinging groovy kind of way. Will this episode stall, refute, or even strengthen this downwards momentum? Historiographers of the X5 cylinder, unaware their world is being labeled such from a gargantuan submarine far below the Antarctic, traditionally date the emergence of archaeology as a professionalized academic institution to the erudite halls of Pakistan's universities in the 1830s. However, professionalized or not, curious folk across the cylinder have always been exploring the dark crevices of the world to make fascinating discoveries of the past, and the dawn of modernity only bolstered the spread of such interests with the less professional variety of explorer. Take, for instance, the case of lead explorer Captain Hyrie, stationed southwest of Byblos, removed from the front lines with Sumer and supplied with more gunpowder and artillery than they'd ever seen. By my calculations, there must be Phoenician treasures lost beneath literal sands of time around here, she declared to her skeptical troops as they stuffed box after box of black powder into a long, dried well. Besides, what is there to lose in this desolate waste? Not even a mountain in sight. Psh, she added, gathering a good number of agreeable grunts from the Circassian patriots as they retreated to safety with the fuse. An almighty shower of sand and stone bursts forth as the explosion rings, and after the troop cough their lungs out, they would quickly notice there is indeed something there, a statue buried deep in the earth, once regal and now shattered. 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor welled those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, "My name is Zenobia, Queen of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Some 8,000 miles away to the south, "Nebby, why has Maria the Lazy been in charge of clearing the map since Mark Bloody 2? Yelled Latiliwadlin. We begin with a shot of the developing Circassian war against Sumer, which to me looks a touch underwhelming all put together. Like, yes, their army is better, and they certainly have the superior statistical base. I'd much rather be them than Sumer, but it's not so overwhelming as to be a walk in the park. Ismail will need campaign discipline and persistence, which arguably have not been his armed forces' greatest attributes in this game. Fatika flips once more, with neighboring city Kuta looking likely to join in the Flipfest also. Truly tragic times for a civ that had been at Gondar during their initial offensive. However, to be entirely fair, you can't deny Ethiopia their right to display grit also, and that dense core of units they have is an admirable city wrecking ball, unlike Amina's divided forces. Can a line be held at Adama, or will that be the next city in Zara's sights? In either case, I'm not sure Pegu being declared on by Ethiopia is the act of hubris that'll save Zazao, sadly. One of two things happened. Guofangbo did a deep study of candidates for general in the region and found the perfect man, or Stillwell himself burst into the palace and declared his qualifications when he heard, because it is very fitting that the foremost American general of the Burmese front of World War II has been chosen to head a perilous charge into the narrow corridor into Dagon Lanfang has for a new war with Pegu. Will it work? Almost certainly not. Is it lore appropriate if they throw soldiers' lives away there anyhow? Yep. The island hub of Alknanure has never been a vibrant center of whale society, to say the least. Famed more for its humdrum fishing lifestyle and picturesque sea views than industry or excitement, few considered the isle much at all. However, those who did visit had a remarkable trend of finding discomfort, is perhaps the best word, being there. A sense that some other presence lingered on the isle, an unease that shapes the geometry of the island. Roads perfectly fitting to terrain like some vast public works were already done on such a scale here it couldn't be fully reclaimed by nature. Strains of metals found around the shores and coves that don't belong and even seem like alloys. Oh, and of course, the stories every other local has of their youth, exploring the nooks and crannies of their limited land in boredom, and coming across odd trinkets, gizmos they can't explain that only recently have become close to explainable. Suggestive of a much more industrial culture than anyone remembers Ononor ever boasting. One probable hoax even brought out a bizarre fabric, a stretchable flag emblazoned with an icon of 3 legs joined as one. Conspiracists developed theories of ancient lost civilizations on that island, but Grace had no time for that nonsense. She certainly doesn't remember any rival there, and she's been here since the dawn of society. No, there wasn't time for the past when the future dawned ever brighter on the cylinder, and not in the favor of Whale. Our standard once-an-episode Britain and Ireland shot just to make sure they're still there. Looks like it. That sure is a lot of boats you can't afford, Grace. How about using some of them? I can only imagine how geopolitical analysts on the cylinder talk about the historic significance of Copano. What an insane roadblock to Teotihuacan's current fleet unity. Certainly a W for Susquehannock, who otherwise seem to be going nowhere fast against Ponca. Elsewhere, we see Mysore has entered the modern age, reminding us that science is, for now, a relative advantage they hold over the cylinder at large. The Mexican composer Carlos Chavez enjoys Aures patronage in this shot, perhaps employing the same skills that allowed him to incorporate indigenous musical aspects into Mexican orchestral works to bring together Aures tradition and new papal influences from the recent conquests. In any case, this snippet of map doesn't reveal too much, except maybe to highlight how under-teched the Papal States look. Should Dihya decide it's rematch time, I don't like Rome's chances with a Mediterranean so full of frigates. I can't lie, I have a bias for Seychelles, and I think part of that is that color scheme. Bold yet chilled. I have to imagine if we asked every reader where on the cylinder they'd choose if they had to show up there, Seychelles core would be a top choice. Anyway, beyond my sigh-filled rambles, It is a genuinely great core for this part of the world. Check out that capital size, that's Pakistan numbers. Over to the side, we can see that Moravi's naval advantage when the war started can now be safely dismissed. Quelimane down to yellow is promising for the Herero, albeit a little neutered by so much of the blockade being pointless embarks. It's astounding. It's a miracle. It's common bloody sense. Potiwara has realized they can reasonably and quickly siege Katu when it's surrounded with minimal defenders. The long humiliation of its loss, which arguably kickstarted the Shrimp Aura loss arc in the first place, should hopefully be rectified next turn. And from there, they actually have a really good angle of attack on Sombrero Negro, should they possess the tactical brains to realize it to fruition. Tatem may still be barely in conversation for a flip short term, but between the convoy trickling in from the north and the geographic realities of the war, I think long term we can say goodbye to Mesoamerican supremacy in these two towns. This is undeniably a bad blow for Spearthrower Owl, who has already been essentially blocked from South American interventions and now has had every expansion opportunity from Pomo's downfall snatched away. Dali will be a headache to defend soon, but Chatkale may make a sensible defensive position, surrounded by hills and a mountain on the approaches that matter. It would be a stagnant front, but if they can keep it held while they pursue their limited other offensive options, Charagua, Karankawa, maybe even a big war with Susquehannock, they can still be considered a contender. Susquehannock must feel it doesn't have enough seaboard to itself yet if it feels the need to employ Chebang Nga, arguably Champa's last powerful king, famed for the ruin he brought upon the dynasty in Dai Viet. Well, that was his name. Clearly, language-specific letter modifiers just ain't hip no more in the lands of old Shiheis, as he's decided to ditch them. What a power move. You don't want the CH man rolling into your harbor. Beyond him, we see the empty space left in the wake of the Onondaga War with the Anishinaabe last episode, where they came closer than expected to some gains, but clearly paid a cost for not sealing the deal. Given the powers on this continent, repairing their carpet should be a priority, preferably cutting back the night budget if they could. Sire, with all respect, I ain't really sure now's the time to be partying here. What with all the tensions and wars about these waters, the commander of the line infantry guarding King MacArthur gingerly stressed to the beach-bound monarch. Us having this land available to us is a quirk of land law in the first place. Oi! You got a crown, Drongo? Eh? Didn't think so. John MacArthur retorted from the bow of the landing craft, drunker than usual. The bloody rum's been telling me this place has power, mate. You want to deny the rum? What do you say, court? John's court, a rotation of drinking buddies and rakes, wooed from the boat's center, while the bodyguards quietly sighed. As the boats rocked up, John didn't even wait for the ramp, plopping off the bow into the wet sand with 2 bottles in his belt and 1 in hand. The commander shook his head as he watched his immortal leader shamble up and onwards, half tripping towards a coastal cove. Don't stop him. Let him get it out of his system. The rum felt good down his throat. Always did, always would. People didn't understand it, but somewhere within he sensed this was his reason for being. This drink was vital to his existence, and surely gave him foresight and wisdom. Sure, a few of the invasions his rum sense had demanded he authorize hadn't worked out, but hey, it kept the army active. John tripped on a rock and barely rolled enough to avoid smashing a bottle. In the process, surprisingly ducking down a tiny cave unexplored by humanity in a millennia. Bugger! Ringed out of the cave, drawing soldiers to stand to attention and rush in as their king slid down a perilous chute. The search for John lasted into the last strands of evening sunlight, as the line infantry located the hole and sent their slimmest member down on a rope. The soldiers' worried cries silenced as he emerged from darkness into an ethereally lit cove, once open to the sea, but now perfectly hidden behind rubble and rocks from some grand cliff collapse, only the faintest orange sunlight escaping from the top. On the sand sat the New South Wales leader, cradling 2 empty bottles and sipping on the third while admiring the centerpiece of the cavern. What is it? murmured the soldier in the cave. "It's a beaut, is what it is," replied John, not even turning around. Sat in the harbor of this once cove was a vessel, almost 2/3 sunk and rotting, yet still majestic. Wood, paper, and metal combined to create a perfect light vessel of war, adorned with cannons John was fairly sure were only recently invented, yet here sat rusted and disintegrated with centuries upon centuries of disuse. Topping the ship was a banner, deep blue with a star and crescent icon, a polity unheard of by the Aussie. "I told you," he started, standing up and dropping the bottle from his hand. "There's a power in these here waters. We need to control them without delay." My fanciful lore aside, I think it's good that they're aspirational enough to be thinking of heading this way. But I would not say now should not be the moment. Sure, Lanfang has taken some hits with Cebu, but New South Wales' losses from the Mysore War match that and more in the short term. They have the stats to build up to a confrontation with Lanfang that could impact the game heavily, but I'm talking in a full episode of build-up time, minimum. We saw Mysore enter the modern era, so naturally they are the next to join our list of ideological civs. Without much shock, they've gone for sensible and boring autocracy. Woo. Perhaps quite fittingly for such an underwhelming choice, we see lands of theirs that grow less and less whelming by the turn. Mangalore and Channapatna, once a core corridor for Mysore's strategic options, are now actively cut off from the imperial core, saved only by open borders with Bangladesh. While their cushion rocket riflemen are cool as hell, I fear they'll matter little once every space around these cities holds a Pakistani unit ready to siege should they next come to blows. There goes the city. More than a long time coming, so apologies if we don't clap too loudly, Felipe, but at least you may be trying a little again. Oh, as I didn't mention this last time, shout out to the new Chono city of Nalkahwe and the devious citadel accompanying it, bringing Chono also up to the gates of Guaycuru's capital. So, I was thinking now's the time we give the kingdom a bit of a refresh, you know? Some spring cleaning. What do you call it? A rebirth. Yep, that should do the trick. Over Kalanga's shoulder, the smoke from Quelimane is so large it's visible in the capital. In a move that's not exactly new, but certainly not unremarkable either, Yanomami has declared war on Shavante once more. They certainly have a decent blob of units on one side of the front. Shavante is never a bad choice to attack, but not unlike Circassia before, I think I expected a bit more advanced and substantial force to take them on. That's a lot of pikemen still, Davi. I think you ought to be doing better than that. The war's outcome will probably come down to focus, especially given Shavante's multiple directions of attack. If Yanomami focus on one target, preferably Marimbu, they have a shot of solid gains. Dispersal means death. Finally, isn't it really depressing how Amazon-less this Amazon shot is? Props to Potiwara for having saved a little more of it, I suppose. Vivaldi thought he'd get some great concepts for his next compositions from a long trip around the Pacific, courtesy of an imperial escort, but his season's idea seemed waylaid by the reality here. Instead of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, he was rewriting it as a two-piece set, calm and terrifying storm. The more important update we can see here is the general growth of the Japanese Pacific, a lifeline for a civ lacking a lot of sensible expansion routes nearer to their core. Uh-oh. Well, whatever skepticism one could have about the Circassian offensive alone, this changes the game entirely if you're Sumerian. Pakistan has already been able to capture Kish in past conflicts, and needless to say, the gap has only grown since then. Plus, Circassia could serve as a great anvil for Jinnah to hammer Sumer against. Snipes of cities could go either way, with both civs operating in the battlefields. Moravi's renaissance moment is slightly spoiled by the loss of their second city, seemingly without any likely chance of a flip. The seas are almost entirely cleared of their presence too, And with an inland capital, that road is closed. Welcome to the Single City Club, Kalunga. I think Pegu is by the buffet crying. Their one upside at present is, of course, the peace deal with Herero. Wanting to simply humiliate their rival to boost their power projection points, I assume, the raising of Quelimane has coincided with Herero declaring a lifeline peace deal, granting Moravia the honor of survival on their terms. I struggle to see anyone but Herero ultimately eliminating them in the short term, but hey, there's plenty of game to go. The famed Lakota resistance fighter Crazy Horse probably deserves a grander task than watching a city pointlessly burn to the ground, but a paycheck's a paycheck. Given the closest settler visible here seems to be of Hansa stock, this raising could amazingly become doubly pointless, an impressive feat. Do send a thought to all of those naval units of Wallachia somehow stuck up in the Baltics, probably awaiting another stomach-upsetting movement to another sea once those open borders deals end. A predictably muddled start to the latest Amazonian war. Marimbu has a scratch, but if that blob continues to hesitate between a focused attack there or a separate attack on Ebelinia, this conflict has no shot of amounting to much. I do appreciate the return of the Karalian line in Yanomami's western front of the conflict, though. A classic. With watery eyes and cold handshakes, peace is declared between Zazao and Luba. Nothing gained or lost but the population of Kushaka and a good bunch of soldiers in the end. Well, didactically speaking, that is. Expand your scope, and Luba strategically won. The Amina surge remains neutered. Note the predictable loss of Kuta to Ethiopia. And the line, the stabilizing force of African geopolitics, is secure. Luba's raison d'etre is safe. That being said, Set helps Sungu if Amina returns to strength and returns, however. As the twin green powers start chipping at Sumer, Pakistan celebrates an entirely separate form of advance as they too enter the modern era. They've been a rising star in terms of tech for a while, and Mysore did just beat them out in this episode to this milestone, but I suspect they have the momentum heading forward. Visitors to Roran, or the socialist state of Roran as it's becoming known locally, are unlikely to miss out on the new exhibit the Grand Palace at Mumo boasted, an artifact of great mystery so impactful on Ujilulu Mugulu that it completely shifted the course of Roran politics as they entered modernity. Back in the 1870s, amateur archaeologists began plunging the depths of Lake Baikal for whatever may be brought up, having fewer legal challenges than disrupting horse grazing on the steppes. Persistence won out over many years of minimal returns when a diving bell reported a gleam in the depths, some metallic structure unusually stainless beneath the icy waters. Divers swarmed the area, and the picture emerged of a ruined ship, maybe only a quarter of one broken up, but nothing like a citizen of Roran had seen before. Pure gray metal, triple the size of the carracks currently swarming the lake's surface, with strange cannons the size of valleys for weapons. King Ujilulu attended the ceremony when one slab was brought up, and could not hold his gasp when the piece finally buoyed up and was brought onto shore. Yes, the engineering itself was almost alien to him, the envisionment of artists' minds more than current technological reality. But what struck him most was the iconography of this panel, a large plaque with some undecipherable language with two images of flags above, one dark blue with a yellow intricate symbol in the middle, and one pure red with a man riding a horse and the central letters TAR. Without delay, his best scholars were put on the case, and in time, they sourced some of the language on the plaque as a derivative, or ancestor, of the Vyatkin language, the text declaring favor of this ship of battle for the glory of our united socialist people, brethren in arms under the banner of Tana Tuva. Did he know what the hell a Tana Tuva was? Nope. But he knew firepower when he saw it, and he knew a vision for society when he felt it. As more and more relics were dredged from the site, the Roran king fell more and more into obsession with this past vision for the present future. In 1880, he dramatically declared that the newfound industrial power of Roran required new visions of shaping society. One could say, a new order of things. The socialist state was declared, with the museum fervently built in the palace to commemorate these near-mystical Baikal artifacts. He despaired at the amount of his peers rejecting their message of Tuva, and lashed out at some reactionaries with pointless war declarations. Surely one day they'll understand the egalitarian beauty of his ideology. Well, you can't say Roran has dismissed the legacy of their famed wriggling riders looking at this carpet, can you? I can only imagine what they'll look like should they hit armor technology in the mid-future. Ooh boy. While ultimately irrelevant, I am intrigued by their declaration of war on Lanfang. That's a big power to declare on another big power. Then again, should I be shocked that the First Order Civ is going against the mining corporate state? A second major civ randomly declares on Lanfang with the Etelmen throwing their lot in. A civ with the theoretical naval power to throw a few ships down that way. As ever, their empire looks solid if a touch limited, both speaking of further expansion routes and peak yield potential given the dismal land here. Their naval numbers also disguise a seemingly starkly lacking land army, both in tech level and simple numbers. They ought to be targeting Green Ukraine ASAP, but they need a touch of productivity first. You must admit, the concept of Neuschwanstein rising out of the karst peaks and river valleys of central China is a stirring image. While it has a low rating on the stat sheet, I actually think it's a very solid wonder for this game, and especially Tang. Extra happiness from every castle in a domination game is a valuable source of happiness for a civ with historic issues in that department. We need to promote Agent Peshkaldaramesh. Doesn't have the same ring as Agent M. Because they clearly got some hot info. New South Wales has indeed decided, only a short while after their mixed results with Mysore, to hit a harder target closer to home in Lanfang. I'll be frank, I think this is foolish, and as someone generally rooting against NSW, I welcome it. Lanfang's home fleet is much better positioned than the Aussies off the bat, and the Javan city's placement on the north coast will make attacking them a pain from the south. Darwad could honestly be the first victim here, as if they weren't having a bad enough century already. The state of Roran may have been the only one to publicly proclaim a philosophy of rule based on relics of past realities, but they aren't the first in a private capacity by a long shot. No, deep in the bowels of the Bjarmian king Harakar's immortal memory, the dawn of his own civilization lingers, scrounging berries and game from the land to the then village of Vina, just a nostalgic vignette in his head now. Above all, he recalls the text he found in one cave he chased a bear into, some form of pamphlet long before the invention of paper, let alone print. It felt destined for him to find, and despite the fact he knew he shouldn't be able to comprehend the language, he felt the presence of another immortal in the words and sensed their meeting. The author proclaimed themselves the Great Rikuo Maya, and the message they imparted to Harakar would forever touch his soul and influence his rule. Just do fucking nothing and prosper, lol. Even now, in 1905, it brought a tear to his eye thinking about it. Of course, some traitorous ministers occasionally opposed this agenda, but then they were reminded Harakar can turn it into a dragon and eat people. Funny how people forget this, honestly. The pace of this long-running conflict has been thematically appropriate. That is to say, glacial. Umpi looks set to flip again, should Vyatka find room for melee amidst their crossbow brigades, although Bjarmia's fleet have had the upper hand in the Arctic Sea. A hit to Tang here. We all know how embargo votes go on the cylinder. You'd think the famous Tang diplomats could have swung the direction of this policy another way, but oh well. It is a shame to distract from Tang's more game-relevant achievement here. To my knowledge, Chixian is the first Tang city to boast aircraft. A carpet they may not possess, but they do possess the cutting edge. Apologies, Agent Peshkaldaramesh, but this intel doesn't quite hit as hard. come back when Roran's plotting against any of their actual neighbors, mayhaps. In a familiar scene, Kish falls to Pakistan and may flip a few times, but unlike the last temporary conquest, one can spot a critical amount of reinforcements, and even more critical innovation. Uruk, near the front lines, boasts 4 planes. Flight must have been Jinnah's path to the modern era, and suddenly the strongholders of Sumer must be getting a touch panicked. Elimination is absolutely viable, maybe even likely, here and now. If Lanfang are planning to redirect forces from Bangladesh over to their new front, they haven't done so yet. The resistance seems pretty fierce, and the land travel is naturally a hard path. So for now, the former capital of Pegu holds up fairly well. Were I a citizen of said city, I'd certainly be cheering on the defenders once Francois Lolonet showed up, a French buccaneer of the Caribbean who certainly wasn't a jolly variety of pirate, more renowned for his sacking of Spanish port cities and open love of torture. Hard to see this as anything but a full autocracy game at this point, as yet another big player on the cylindrical stage joins up to Team Problematic. Old Shihei's is, of course, probably making the right call. They are certainly going to need all the fight they have to conquer the daunting North American continent. Unfortunately for that dream, their current two-tile war with Ponca isn't an auspicious sight for those dreaming that dream. And no matter how cool the icon is, it's a touch worrying how committed they remain to their lay-at-scene musketman Yu. In an episode full of the future, Susquehannock might need to leave the past behind as soon as they can. Despite being the birthplace of archaeology, the public of Pakistan broadly felt little need for its fruits in the same way other civs found themselves enthralled. And this was an attitude matched in Jinnah himself. For sure, digging up Pakistan's own heritage was valuable for national pride, and some of those incredibly ancient sewer structures found beneath the earth of the Indus Valley were impressive, but in Pakistan, the past was overshadowed by the future, a glorious future. The capital of Karachi heaved with life, banners out of windows as a procession of newly reorganized infantry sporting cutting-edge and rifles marched through the streets, followed by carriages carrying Jinnah in Pakistan's high society. Their destination? The square outside the newest pearl on the city's coastal skyline, a magnificent building of worship that screamed modernism, the Sagrada Familia. Once considered a bit player on their own subcontinent, between the recent conquests in the west, land grabs to the east, and the general prosperity of life in the core, this was a people firmly looking forward rather than behind them. A nasal sound began infesting the scene, and while some members of the public rub their ear or get a bit nervous, Jinnah and his military staff look upwards. No, the rifleman wouldn't be the cherry on top of today's celebrations. The sight of a craft of wood frame, paper, and iron flying between the top of the new wonder would be. Pakistan had tamed the power of flight itself. Sumer will be a walk in the park. For those unaware, the Sagrada Familia is a modded wonder that starts a golden age and boosts great person points in the city by 50%. On the stats sheet, it's rated at 6, which I think can be a bit generous. Its usefulness is very dependent on where the AI decides to stick it. But Karachi is a magnificent spot for the wonder. Plus, of course, no better time for a golden age than during a fairly vital war to keep those units pumping and the gold up to afford them. So a double win for Pakistan. On the other end of the impressiveness spectrum, Chono has decided to devote their time to Big Ben, a wonder rated at just 1 on our sheet. Those who know its power, cutting all gold costs to purchases by 15%, may think that's a little harsh. But, well, we've never found the AI to be sensible or even sporadic in their gold purchasing capabilities. So a wonder bolstering that, not to mention piling on dreaded great merchant points, is a waste. Then again, Chono is not what you can call hard up in the runnings right now, and can afford a little luxury indulgence like this, perhaps sensing how whimsical it is to place Westminster in the sight of IRL Buenos Aires. Vlad, why? They haven't even chosen to burn this one. You can't resettle it. It's just gone. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman takes the opportunity of this great defensive national struggle to insert himself into the growing autocratic movement, joining the ever-expanding list. The Lanfang front looks a little weaker than last seen, and Sadung surprisingly looks on the brink, although I think at best that would be a flip and most likely the defense wins out. India is such a balanced region in this sense. Even the supposed third civ of the land has hands. This has to be up there in terms of wars this season that you'd instinctively think should be big deals but simply aren't, due to the deceptively insane borders this map has ended up with. Maybe the Kara-Bactrian War can contest it for the title. In any case, the grand scale of this new war between solid, stagnant Kalmar and the plucky Estonians is the coastal tile south of Gotland. That is genuinely the sole point of contact between these civs, so maybe don't keep your expectations too high for this conflict. An update on the Ethiopia-Zazao front further confirms the former's advantage, with Fatika and Kuta looking surprisingly secure for the moment. Amine does have troops, but perhaps in paranoia of further pincer attacks, they are mostly stationed to the south by poor, ravaged Kushaka. Perhaps the most tragic sight here is the Ethiopian Great General highlighted. It appears we have our first sign of a GP name list being exhausted. So much character lost, replaced by faceless NPCs from now on. See? Ain't that better? Moravi can't boast of much anymore, but they do have a tactical brain of the Napoleonic era on their side. The Austrian field marshal who, albeit with a mixed record of loss and victory, eventually helped develop the Trachenberg plan that defeated the Emperor of the French. I somehow don't see him achieving anything so grand here, but a marshal may dream. Where some dream, others get to act, and so it is for General Opachankanu. In our world, leader of the Powhatan Confederacy, and thus propagandized as a raider on the Jamestown colony, plus being Pocahontas' uncle. I imagine the required quick-fire logistics and ambush tactic skills he possesses earn him a ticket to this frontier, as Kish flips more confidently into Pakistani hands. Scariest of all is the fate of Nibru, the theoretical fallback of Sumer when the capital falls. Already in the black from bombing and vulnerable to naval attack once one caravel dies. A new era of war has dawned. What a mess of a landmass we have here, and pretty perfectly designed to ensure that no civ has enough space of production to dominate it without having to lug over their main armies for the fairly pointless trophy of barren rock and ice. We've seen civs in past seasons create decent power bases here, but I don't see that in this case, at least for now. Scotland and Susquehannock are at war, and while that theoretically matters, it practically doesn't. Not too sure what I can comment on here. The Pacific sure is Pacificing. Tang's visual spread on the waters is seemingly growing by the turn, although an indulgent amount of workers seems to be contributing to that. Well, I stand corrected on the matter of New South Wales decision-making. In characteristic fashion, they pulled off their signature move, making a ton of units show up out of nowhere from the general direction of their continent. Darwad is bruised but secure, and a boisterous armada of Australian pirates are bombarding Bakuan with all their might. The land campaign, however, is still a touch stillborn at the moment, no matter how many advanced gunmen New South Wales send out to land on Java. Being a citizen of Hobdan was a depressing enough experience when it meant sending off your children to become Washabe and sent to the slaughter against the ever-encroaching Susquehannock. But the bells and drums ringing out in 1908 for the declaration of yet another Anishinaabe assault was soul-crushing. The city reeked of despair, and only state policy against internal movement, plus the cutting off of the road, prevented a mass exodus to the mountains. White Eagle was not immune from the morose atmosphere, and it took all his strength to stand still and declare a commitment to defensive action. helped a little by the reports that Pontiac's offense was a touch lacking. Still, he stayed up at night often, wondering where things went wrong. Reading treatises, seeking advisors, visits to the troops, all follies in terms of giving his mind rest. A common spot for contemplation was, naturally, the Grand Mesa. What better scenery for a ruler's solitary meditation? And so, for a few weeks after the declaration of war, White Eagle controversially left his capital for time to think in the grand mountain space. He ditched his entourage at a lodge and walked up and up, climbing at parts, sliding down slopes at others, just contemplating failure. That's when he saw it. Literally. The word failure written on a cliff wall in a calm clearing. What? He rushed towards the painted text and looked around at this eerie space. Secluded and clear, yet somehow warm, with signs of a long, long dead fire pit near the wall. More so, White Eagle sensed a presence, a feeling he had only ever gotten from rare diplomatic meetings with other immortals. A touch of a dissipated presence, lingering long after it should have gone. He checked again, and realized he shouldn't even be able to understand the text. It wasn't in his language. Yep, definitely the work of a fallen immortal then. They all had some understandings of each other. Walking right against the wall, he studied the strokes of the words, the fingerprints of the author left to time on this wind-sheltered shelf. Beneath the word, a little icon and signature sat, a red dream catcher in the letters I.J. White Eagle stood back and, oddly, felt a kinship. Maybe failures can be remembered too, in small ways, far in the future. He dipped his hand into the dead fire pit, working the ash into a fine, sticky powder with a dash of water from his canteen. He made an addendum to the wall, a Mythi and Pike drawing, with W.E. next to them. If you were feeling good about White Eagle's defense against the Susquehannock invasion, I apologize for giving that much of a blip of triumph. Everyone knows Ponca and triumph are antonyms. Now, that being said, Anishinaabe do not look assault-ready right now, and I genuinely wonder if they've been brought in all off guard by Karakitai or other civ yet to declare, because they don't have a semblance of a carpet nor even the positioning near Ponca to pretend otherwise. The stats tell the story, though. Pontiac could rest for 3 turns and wake up without his civ having taken any real damage, only to shrug and build up an army double the strength of Ponca. It'll take a little bit for a sensible formation to emerge, but once it does, hope dawn is hope done. Nibru flips one full cycle between Sumer and Pakistan as the Gulf Fleet shows their purpose. It's dramatically over for Sumer already, and the only question left is how the final divvying up will go between the snipes and flips left. You'd think after all the resources wasted on that bloody corridor between them, that Susquehannock would keep the persistence up once Anishinaabe came in to distract the defenders, but nope. Maybe this is a 4D chess game, and old Shihei's would rather sit back and watch Ponca inconvenience some plain cities with swordsmen full force than split their attention. I can respect petty, and it certainly isn't a lightning start for Pontiac, although to be clear, he is going to bring the hammer down soon. Well then, I guess Circassia just didn't need that capital. They're chill like that. What a rad civ. Oh, for fuck's sake, Burzig, I can't tell whether you lost the snipe off then gave up, or even worse, gave up and watched Pakistan march in, but this was a genuine moment for you. A capital or even an elimination to notch on your belt, but no, gotta ensure Jinnah's rise continues. Oh yeah, let's move to that side. This has already been a fantastic episode for the Crescent Moon Civ, and they haven't even solidified the elimination yet. It's not just grabbing 3 Sumer cities, although that's an achievement for sure. It's that their expansion options westward just grew significantly. The cherry on top? Their UA has new victims to claim in Pesajet and Eastern Orthodox following cities. The Middle East shall never escape border gore. Adama falls to the red, suggesting a return to a status so quo to before Zazua's resurgence, Ethiopia even regains all its lost cities. Ouch, this hurts to see. Oh, and I did check. Hyksos is not at war with anyone here to my understanding, just loitering. They're looking surprisingly advanced, although I imagine the small size of their lands allows their carpet to be denser, and thus they look stronger. They're also citadeling into Ethiopia, and a sudden side attack from them would be appropriate karma for Luba. Unuba, being the latest to join the omni-autocracy of this season, does provide us a great shot of the full scope of their core, a very dense engine of anti-MacArthur sentiment. Seriously, I do love the structure of this city. It's just spoiled by the sense that it's getting rapidly outpaced. The hourglass has turned, especially with dynamite approaching, and with it the loss of their Great Wall protection. New South Wales has the better infantry, ranged, and cavalry units already. I don't think the narrative of Unbreakable Banuba has much longer to live if tested. They've got it? The shrimp lovers have gone and got it! They're advancing and sieging and look decently set to take at least Sombrero Negro, after which Waikuru's capital will be isolated and easy prey. See folks, never give up on even the deadest looking seed. I like you, old Chiheis, but you haven't been making the smartest war decisions lately, it must be said. An attack on Teotihuacan by Susquehannock just sounds like an efficient way to lose a city, many boats, and a needless amount of embarked units. Battered though they may be, with frigate support, the pirate crews of New South Wales have brought Bakulan to the brink. Maybe bringing up that fleet from Ross would help, but that would be so less dramatic and rugged, wouldn't it? And here's the other side of the coin. A tiny loss to New South Wales might be justified by the units focused instead on the Bangladeshi front, where the fate of a capital hangs in the balance, and perhaps even more once Rahman's thinning army is further reduced. His navy is arguably worse, stuck at Gallius Tech, making Kulna and its 3 tiles of coastal vulnerability a juicy target, following on from the razed city of Kumila. Although, then again, would that conquest not face the fire too? Damn it, Civ 5 AI. Fled from Lagash, harassed through the roads to Nibru, trusted couriers and loyal guards blown to pieces without even the honor of a battle as the damnable flying machines of their enemy bombarded the last fortifications of the Sumerian Empire. And through it all, 2 people joined at the hip. Eonatum despaired, to put it mildly. It was clear that hope no longer remained. The last envoys he sent to negotiate a quick-fire peace were returned via ship cannon in chunks. Green-clad cavalry openly trotted outside the walls, and the ruined harbor of Nibru had Pakistani sailors disembarking into the city. What troops the Sumerians had left were not loyal, but zealous and/or foolhardy, fully aware they were spending their lives in the sake of honor. He dared to look out the window, only to find his cheek gently grasped and turned away. My darling, let us simply cherish our presence together, as this may be the last chance. Shots outside, in order to open the chamber door. Eonatum took his wife's hand. I hope with all my heart that you know you have always been more than just my partner. You've been my rock, my passion, the muse on which a civilization is built, all so you could better live in comfort and style. You're so much beyond my hot Sumerian wife. You're my eternally loved wife. The hinges rattle as the chamber door begins to collapse to the troops battering it. Eonatum stands up straight and faces the door, prepared for honorable death. That is, until a spark and glow begin to emerge around him, a shallow light glow of physics beyond his understanding. What the? He murmurs, feeling his body quake under the waves. In a split second, he reaches to his wife's hand, and she his. The glow expands, and then, with a click and a poof, the couple disappear, whisked away to the far south. When the siege breaks into the room, they find nothing but a dropped crown, and stories persist for centuries thereafter about the fate of the king of Sumer and his, the stories insist, hot Sumerian wife. And thus, with one short and sharp swoop of a war, I invite you to press F in the chat once more in honor of Sumer. I know the eulogies are best saved for the power rankings, but I was a backer of this Civ out of the gate, and so this is a sad sight for me, if not a shocking one. I thought having a Civ so old, but in terms of the leader and the mod itself, was a cool concept, and somehow convinced myself their UA population boost would make them an early game shooting star. That didn't quite happen, and frankly, I hear Sumer will be an easily forgotten Civ of this season when we look back. They got a few hits in on Phoenicia and Maine, but never did much bold otherwise. You could say their personality was a touch homebody. Should Pakistan continue their rise, Sumer may have a legacy as a first stepping stone, and that itself would be more than earned, debatably. Should Pakistan continue their rise, Sumer may have a legacy as a first stepping stone, and that itself would be more than earned, debatably. F, you bald wife guy. Look here, Mr. Rene. Declaring war on Luba? Fair. They have an island city you can simply surround and grasp in your maritime hands, and are unlikely to coordinate an effective force against your land-bound cities. Declaring war on Ethiopia? I'd have waited to have a few more units on the border, for sure, but also a fine idea. They're committed and depleted against Zazao, and if you could grab Debre Berhan, it'd be a legend-making achievement. Declaring war on both? At once? There's a fine line between brave and foolhardy, mate, and you crossed it. Kamina ought to still be in play, but you've made this needlessly hard on yourself. I half wonder if this was a rare defensive pack being triggered. We almost never get those in the CBR. Much boozing and plundering goes down as the pirate armada break into Bakawan Harbor at long last and have their fill, I'm sure. Really shouldn't be hard for it to be retaken. Just look at all those Lanfang frigates hiding away in reserves to the north. But one can't deny New South Wales' ability to probe his rivals. Ket, Kipchaks, and the Aures have all decided Estonia's getting a little big for their britches and added to Mary's war list. Interesting to see Ket and Kipchaks fighting side by side, even if their camaraderie is a bit distant from being relevant in the actual conflict. Sombrero Negro hits the red with plenty of melee around it to see the job through, maybe even a little too much. Moving up the cannon wouldn't hurt. While Mission El Toba is sensibly left until after, as it starves down to 7 pop. I really can't say what turned the switch on Camaral's military brain, but I appreciate it for the spectacle alone, not to mention continuing the steady clearing out of South America's also-rans. This season is really a lesson for us all. Let's not take for granted all of the nice, clean, cool Pacific empires we've had throughout the CBR, and hopefully will have again. I genuinely forgot this low-level conflict was ongoing, and based on the mild splattering of units present, one might suspect some of the leaders involved have too. Soaring westwards from the oppressed Hopedon, through the plains and over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, a leader is on the march as far from the legacy of the Comanche as one can be. Nay, at this time, Law Speaker Shakes I is doing about the opposite of pondering the past. Eyes pink with sleeplessness, common for him when a campaign heats up, he diligently pages through reports and summaries until the depths of the night at the General's camp in Waraka. War consumes his mind, but of course it must. To not let it do so would be the most severe form of disrespect for those whose life it takes, surely. And so it's possible for him to be surprised by the simple flicker of a light on as he enters a new room supplied by his army. "What's that light?" he barks, unusually shocked and a little on edge after days of cannon drills as background noise. "The light bulb, Law Speaker? It was in the science reports you'd been given, although I fully understand if that's, fallen by the wayside," the underling responds, eyeing another pile of reports barely touched given the focus of Shakes's life right now. The Law Speaker shrugs, then slowly walks over to a window. The city, newly settled to his perception, sleeps beyond as he silently watches the details on the horizon. With the primitive lights going out, his citizens turn to sleep, bicycles whizzing through the streets, clouds of smoke pumping out of hardy industry more than ever. My mind. It's been on war for so long, and must yet still, the leader delicately states, maybe more for himself than the perturbed underling watching him. The future requires sacrifice. This progress before me is built on what we've done and will continue to do. Right? His question slips away as he continues staring out at his people, more advanced than ever. The attendant slips away, leaving the Tlingit leader alone. My fanciful scrawls aside, nothing too surprising going on here. Elem is securely Tlingit, Teotihuacan are keeping Tatem in the red but have little chance of reacquiring it, and Dali plus Shetkale are being prodded for weakness without impact. Tlingit entering the modern era is only surprising in terms of which civs got there first, frankly, and what we'll start to see showing up on their lands. Tang joins a select advanced few in the early aeronautics business, already having cranked 24 planes visible on my screen. Wow, it's just really damning of Tang because it proves how fast they could crank out units if they actually wanted to. Tang's army is advanced but remarkably tiny, and this explosion of airplane production makes it hard to argue against the reality that Taizong just doesn't want a carpet. They are plenty disharmonious, to be fair. Can you blame him? Coming straight out of the south side, of where the Amazon used to be, Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. himself, has walked into the front lines to hypnotize some Yanomami fools with his flashy ways, representing the Inland Tunes music scene. Those North Coast bastards could never make tracks so juicy. They were the first to do it, and will always be the best to it. North Coast worthier coast. Every Yanomami soldier knows those inland fools don't really know a thing about quality music, and Tupac Shakur is among them to confirm it with some Yanomami love. So how do you want it, inland scene losers? Cannon fire, horse trampling, or musket ball? I'm sure nothing bad will occur to either of these two great musicians, especially in close proximity to each other. Potuara, come on, buddy. I've hyped you up way too much this episode for you to move all those troops away. The main gate isn't even locked now. You have all the troops nearly. Just slide that longswordsman in or whatever. Please, for little old me. Like building a blood bank in Wallachia, placing 3 citadels in a row to expand your land in a city you're actively raising seems like an exercise in wasting resources on rewards that will vanish in a flash. Momentarily funny, I can't lie, but maybe not the best development Scythia needs at a time of great doubt in their capacities amongst us readers. The war between Yanomami and Shavante, which now seems a little more culturally tinged than when I began this episode, simmers. Even without the jungle, this continent's sleepy reputation persists, it seems. Even the Chono seem unable to make a dent in Shavante despite overwhelming statistical advantage. Finally, of course, we must register Yanomami also selecting autocracy, I guess. Next. The delegates return from Dongwonlu with great news. All the nations of the world are to bid to host a grand fair of advancements, showcasing the best this modern age has to offer. A touch irrelevant to our game, but in the spirit of progress we've seen over this episode nonetheless. Of course, the citizens of Kamino are probably not too focused on this whimsical news, given the blockade they are essentially already under, only one layer of their own navy holding back a bold blue reckoning. On the Ethiopian front, skirmishes on the region seem to be going nowhere fast, although I am only now noticing how outrageous the citadeling has been up here. Bloody hell, Renee. Taizong sat in the central audience chamber of his palace, face stony with a hint of boredom, as an unusually visible degree of protest bounded through the room. Merchant representatives screaming their lungs out, financial advisors rebuking his policy, even a few generals imploring he renounce the diplomatic corps on this occasion. The uproar went on for the better part of 4 hours, representative by representative venting their displeasure. The root? the total failure of the political apparatus to beat back the World Congress's embargo of Tang. Surely, after all the lofty vaunting they've awarded themselves for centuries, they could put in the work to prevent economic catastrophe befalling the state. Finally, silence fell, and Taizong rose. I shall issue a moderate rebuke in writing of this policy defeat. Thus the matter shall not be discussed further. This audience is over. To say the crowd was disappointed would be an understatement, but they know better than to criticize their emperor directly when he declares the matter closed, so the hall emptied out. As the final malcontent left, Tang's face relaxed immediately, and he strode back to his throne and the balcony beyond it. Finally. Such useless words thrown carelessly. One of his foremost advisors, a high priestess of Shaktism, followed him out. If I may say, Emperor, it is strange to see such a happy expression adorn your visage in these circumstances. I am no economic advisor, but we suffered a loss with this embargo, did we not? The Emperor allowed himself a wry grin to the high priestess. Did we now? And leaning on the balcony to face her, he continued. It has been long known to me and others in high office that the resources taken on in foreign trade be of more use to our common good as a state spent internally. But outlawing external trade myself? No, impossible to consider. Going against the merchant lord so nakedly would invite chaos to the lands. But, were the global community to impose it on us... You mean to say this was desired? She shot back, surprised and bemused. Desired? Why, it was intended. The Tang Diplomatic Corps knows what it aims to achieve and excels in doing so. They perform their roles to perfection. It is such a shame I will have to publicly rebuke them to calm the waters. Oh well, the future comes anyway. Yes, folks, I, your trusted narrator, misled you earlier. Tang losing this vote is actually not a bad thing, or at least that's my opinion on it. Why? Well, recall the Tang UA. Simply put, all internal trade routes are boosted for Tang based on the science output of the city they're being sent from, and I can attest from trying them out in a game myself that it's a very satisfying ability. By all accounts, Tang should not be wasting their traders on external trade in the first place, and a congressional embargo is the perfect way to ensure the AI actually does this. Tang had 421 gold per turn coming in last episode, so they shouldn't be forced into bankruptcy from this, of course. Beslan, a lowly sailor of the Circassian Navy, may never appear in history books, but had the honor of being the last casualty of the overwhelmingly forgotten Caspian War between his nation and Bactria. A rigging hand of the Gallius fleet near the Sarai front, a sniper's precise musket ball penetrated his lung mere minutes before the conclusion of the battle and subsequent knowledge of the peace declaration. One of many lives spent entirely fruitlessly when the handshake has already closed a war on the books over the history of the cylinder. Beslan toppled off the sails as he was struck, crashing without dignity or an offer of aid from his crewmates into the sea's calm blue depths. No one but him, in his state of terror, could know how long his consciousness lasted under the debris-strewn waves. Even the sub's almighty surveillance would throw its arms up. But between the air immediately leaving through his bullet hole and the cold shock of the water around him, it is feasible the sailor saw lifetimes not unlike his before he succumbed to a watery grave. For the Caspian has seen the corrupt cycle of the cylinder like few other places on its surface. Down in the darkest depths, what wonders of pre-antiquity could Beslan have drowned beside? The discolored banner of Tamar, lost from a destroyed trireme, a somehow still blinking panel from an exploded Turkish nuclear submarine, the tragic skeletons of drowned Kalmyk cavalry stupidly placed on boats instead of the steppes. Maybe Beslan even floated down past a nearly unrecognizable set of bones, bearing a uniform very similar to his own, that of a galleass rigger, but bearing the banner of the Timurids rather than Circassia. Above all else, should he have kept consciousness enough to see these wondrous sights lost to all watchers, the thought might cross his dying brain that so much has been lost to this god-forsaken sea, ever stuffed with boats and embarked units, with so little gain, and that this has happened every time before, and will happen over and over again. Would he find any comfort in joining this cycle? That is not for me to tell. Y'all remember this war was happening? I sure didn't. Adama fell off screen, in a harder fashion than I even suspected. Were Ethiopia to peace out here, this would unfortunately have to be classified as an overall win for them, if just for what they were about to lose in comparison. That being said, I can't help but wonder if we're about to be another silly runaround of Lake Chad, as Fatika remains in the red and Amina's army honestly looks a touch healthier in size and position than Ethiopia's, albeit less so in tech. If this war genuinely continues on in a loop of each other's armies surging and getting depleted just enough to grab then lose these three cities, I might just have to give up on both parties entirely. Maybe the bigger question we should be asking is, why Hyksos and Ares aren't feasting on this tired prey for now? I don't really see Japan versus Yunnan as a conflict of astounding significance, it must be said. But a highlight slide is always appreciated, if not by me or the readers, then at least by power anchors tired and looking for an easy slide pick. Hello gang, I'll join you again someday. I do very much appreciate the irony of the second unifier not quite unifying Japan, but actually managing in this reality to rule over the Korean peninsula. Japan overall is in such a weird place, strong and fairly advanced, even up to riflemen at this point, but definitively lacking in an edge and opportunities. The adaptation of the Tlingit faith throughout their lands must surely be helping, but in a world where everyone's got busted faith bonuses, no one has busted faith bonuses. The announcement that Teotihuacan is still flipping that city is a good sign for those rooting against an ever-expanding Tlingit blob victory. Turns out they ain't undefeatable. In celebration, why don't you contemplate the serenity of a perfect Kiwi sunset or something? I can only assume that's why we're staring in New Zealand. Okay, stop relaxing, start partying hard. You thought taking Katu was hardcore already? Potiwara has actually achieved the unthinkable and conquered a city they've had overwhelming numbers against for centuries. The Guaycuru capital looks to be up next, and after that, the Guaycuru will just be a Uruguayan trio and some island colonies. The press of Anishinaabe against Hubdon has similarly started in earnest. Maybe a touch slower than some would predict, but creating an inescapable net around the ancient city. As stated many times before, the loss of Hubdon is by no means the end of Ponca when they have such a great citadel city in the Rockies, but it'll certainly still be demoralizing and an end to all relevance in wider continental struggles. Wanshude being in fact too mountainous and small to affect transport or be desirable. Revenge sure is a sweet dish, one a certain Lancer seems to be enjoying as he blocks Lanfang movement into Hong Sawatoi's harbor, surely remembering how his proud nation was swiped at during their recent peak. Anything to prevent Lanfang ascension after that is a pretty honorable move, no matter how ultimately useless or petty. However, Lanfang seems to have this city knocked hard and has more than enough reserves to squeeze some unit, any unit, in soon. Wow! Look! Estonia and Kalmar made peace! Wow! Look! It accomplished nothing! Truly the soul-strengthening experiences peak CBR is founded upon. Never really took note of how many great engineers Susquehannock seems to be piling up. Geez. I mean, better than great merchants, but still. Why not spent on a wonder or invested into manufactories? At the very least, Nikolaus August Otto, the German engineer of the modern petrol combustion engine, should feel spiritually at home in North America, happy to wait around for his time to shine in an era or so. You gotta hate when you finally decide to get off the couch and touch some ocean. And that's the day the owner of the coaster swimming near decides they want to declare war on your nation. Happens to all of us one time or another. In seriousness, this is a classic could be a real war but won't be scenario. Potiwara doesn't have a lackluster navy and could certainly make a go at Herrero's west coast, but I just don't see it happening. Better spent on the Rio Plata region anyway. Biggie slinks away as the North Coast scores the victory, suddenly locking in and realizing Marimbu was ripe to pluck. South America seems keener each episode to disprove its old reputation, and I appreciate the effort. Flip possibility aside, where does that army grind next? When I last reported this battlefront, Vyatka had an edge on land and looked ready to grab Umpi while Bjarmia had a stronger navy. Now, in breaking news, Vyatka holds the edge on land and looks ready to grab Umpi, while Bjarmia has the stronger navy and is actually making a move on Koloperem, another city that has slipped between the two multiple times. Never an end to the action here. Thank you, audience! Country star Mac Davis bellowed out to the crowd at the rock church that for this night only would serve as a dramatic amphitheater. Audiences cheered from high above and down below, but Mac kept a cool face. The man who wrote A Little Less Conversation knew a thing or two about keeping the action going. Finally, I have a special guest at this concert. The one, the only, our immortal leader, Zara Jacob. The religiously minded leader swaggered out of the church with the full confidence of a prophet, seizing the stage from Mac to the astonished cheers of his people. Ethiopia didn't have much to applaud objectively for in a long time, but its people retained hold of faith in place of results, faith in their version of the Petsajet faith, faith in their nation and its future, and faith in the wisdom of Zara Jacob. With saintly dignity, the Grand Prince opened his arms, accepting the adulations of his subjects, before booming out, "Ethiopians, we resurge, we persevere, and Set himself sends glory our way. The sin of Zazao drives their defeat, and our victories of late." The cheers went into overdrive, but Zara had one more pull to turn this hype into national glory. "Our victories are preordained. I know, for our wise archaeologists have brought forth evidence of the justness of our conquests. Behold!" He stood aside as staff brought out a large map, carefully handled and unfurled, its significance clear. It showed, in remarkably accurate cartography, an Egyptian realm that stretched from the domains held by Luba all the way to beyond Arabia. "My scholars discovered a holy cavern containing a stele and this map amongst other astounding relics of both future and past. They dated it to beyond the founding of our civilization, but it clearly shows in our abhorrent tongue and our state's name conquests that we are due. Conquests that shall surely occur, for Set has destined it. There is no other explanation for this map." Cheers can be the greatest mask from scrutiny. Whatever the ambitions at home are, Ethiopia is pretty damn stretched right now. To the east, a large blob, primarily cavalry in nature, charged to their likely deaths in Somali Seychelles, while the veteran forces of the Zazao front hold firm in the west. Their actual core, virtually empty. Lanfang can cheer at 2 victories this turn, the reconquest of Bakawan off-screen, moderately suggesting the New South Wales invasion isn't going much anywhere, and the second conquest of Pegu's former capital spotlighted here. Hands up if you've seen this before. One civ has a solid reserve of defenders on land, the other has command of the seas. What are the chances we see this war settled before the city flops down to 3 or 2 pop? Confirming what we could assume before, the forces of New South Wales seem just plain inept here. I don't know what goes on in Ross, but no one wants to leave it behind, seemingly. Lanfang's navy has either built up more in response to the threat, or just filtered a few south. The end result, either way, being that the approaches into Indonesia proper seem much more guarded than previously, which sucks for a leader who'd rather party than put in effort. The romantic strings of Borodin soundtrack a nation gearing up for a battle once more, on familiar turf, but perhaps not with similar momentum. Herero and Luba have tussled many a time, but Herero declaring was always the more common direction of aggression. Luba is making a risky move, weighing up the risk Seychelles poses to the east as minimal, and the potential of a sweep southward is much more worth it. Musketmen and crossbows against line infantry and skirmishers does serve as a good justification for this choice. And either Herero is hiding many more troops on the Cape, or the Moravi Wars cleared them out to a greater extent than I realized. As ever, the stalemate potential between these two is high, and I would warn Luba against underestimating the bold Blue Boys. But were they to break through, Luba could set themselves up as masters of South Africa without dispute. Oi, you were already talked about in the last few episodes, Mr. Magnum, I swear. Get a new bit. Putting that aside, Pakistan is looking pretty fine. Big army, if a tad low on the actual melee compared to skirmishers and cavalry, but hey, when you have planes and the other civs don't, it's hard to criticize you. Ares has always been rich in opportunities, and with Dihya signed up to autocracy, their military potential ought to be going up. This begs the question, why aren't they doing more? They certainly have a bit of a Tang issue, with an army more net than carpet no matter how advanced the troops are. I fully believe they could grab Rome for themselves at their choosing right now regardless, but stomping on the weakest civ they border won't actually enhance them all that much, and it's sorta an indictment on Ares' lack of urgency that Portugal and Hyksos have been allowed to develop into meddlesome thorns. They'd ultimately win a conflict with either, but it'd be messy and painful. Ooh, it's been a while since we had a proper derby war between the League and the Union. It'll be an eternal shame for me regarding this season that these two civs were so mid, given them being in the same CBR is some of the best historical synergy we've ever had between immediate neighbors. The historical legacy both have IRL being deeply entwined. What's even better, both have their UU boats deployed full force, although frankly neither is especially impressive. Hans's cogs being caravels that unlock early and help civilian movement, while Kalmar's gun hulks are weaker galleasses with double movement and coast. It's honestly a bit odd how little I expect this to go anywhere meaningful. Kalmar has the better stats and armed forces, but with all of the League's frontline cities being one-tiled coast harbors, I struggle to see sieges being competently planned. Meanwhile, Ribe is probably the most vulnerable city in the war, but Wellenweber's history of warfare is so dog-awful and army too small for me to see him pulling it off. A W for historical authenticity here, and probably not much else. The oft-disputed fields of Western Europe were a stark sight from Beatrice's native Amazon rainforests, as she took this experimental musical tour when she really has more expertise as an artist. To tell the truth, it didn't feel like it was going that well. She had been excited to perform in France, a place renowned for radical thought and practice, only to find that, well, they weren't taking all the change in the world right now in the healthiest of ways. There are so many ways for a society to face the future and the lessons of the past. The vignettes seen today should have more than displayed that. However, no one did it quite like Robespierre, and France was in a rapture of guillotine chopping and National Guard roundups at present. The future had enemies, and the enemy of the future was an enemy of the people. And these enemies had to be rooted out and purged, and yada yada yada, one could get the gist from there. Odd foreign guests traveling through the lands were a key focus of suspicion, and Beatrice quickly decided to reroute her travels up to Inverness instead. Of course, even her brief observations on France permitted her to see the truth. It wasn't clamor for the future creating chaos in France, nor traitors trying to turn the clock back. It was the deadliest ailment a nation can face of them all: stagnation. Where others now flew, the French trod the same old ground. Where others made discoveries, France trailed in their footsteps. National Guard were partisan soldiers desperate to fight for an ideological cause, yet they had none. The nation was indeed restless for change, and, amazingly, Robespierre was not able to give that. Okay, France are maybe not in as dire a situation as my fiction makes out, but everyone seems to agree that the potential they had out of the gate has dimmed significantly. Major players don't have an enemy citadel against their capital, for one. Ten slides and one whole turn from the last update on this frontier, we can see that Morimbi, to Chavante's credit, did actually get a flip in. Outside of that, little else is of practical note. A solid defensive blob surrounds Abayinha, but if Yanomami put forces on it, or even the capital alone, they'd have a decent shot at doing damage. Masterminding this new stage of the war is a very fitting figure, Virgilino Ferreira de Silva, although everyone just calls him Limpiao, foremost of all the congachos of Brazilian history. Essentially, during the hard times of the late 1800s, early 1900s in Brazil's northeast, a good chunk of people turned to nomadic banditry as a lifestyle, and Limpiao's band of about 100 were the best of the best, capturing towns momentarily and defeating the law outnumbered. Davi has simply commissioned him now to think a little larger. I dare say that appears to be a Rapa Nui scout blocking Hong Swatoi from the Lanfang fleet, if they actually want to bring a melee ship in now. Even in death, Rapa Nui culture demands they be the class clown, it seems. Great news for Bangladesh, who have recaptured the pivotal city quite confidently. In defense of my own earlier predictions, Lanfang could certainly be more aggressive here. Fangbo was just a little precious about reducing his corps' carpet, seemingly. Blockade blasted, the naval siege of Kamina has begun proper. Lending their expertise to this endeavor is the great Thomas C. Kincaid, one of America's foremost admirals in the Pacific Campaign of World War II. As commander of the 7th Fleet, he played a central role in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the last battleship battle in history, to date, and perhaps the largest naval battle in history, period, with over 200,000 souls entering the fray. Cross fingers he sticks around long enough to see Seychelles get their first battleships, eh? I swear, Potawara heard all our community's boos and jeers, and rather than getting mad, they've decided to get down to business. Misiono Toba looks fairly doomed, albeit the affair would be performed far quicker with a few siege units. At least they have a stable head leading command with General Al-Harith ibn Jalala, 6th century king of the Ghassanids and foremost Arab ally of the Byzantines against the Persians during the time of Justinian and Khosrow I. To be honest, my biggest criticism right now lies not with the army, but Potawara's navy, who have the numbers to at least attempt a move on Laguna Los Pases, but seem content to patrol their own coast instead. Woo! A hat trick in military figures so close to the episode's end. My treat. Well, not a treat for the undefended great generals of Ponca, who, with honorable patriotic valor, have decided to block Pontiac's approach with their bodies. Romantic, if a touch useless, like all the best romantic things in life. Then again, I just researched the dude, and he's yet another one of those 19th century American generals who did a bit of stuff in 1812, a bit of stuff against indigenous peoples, and a larger bit of stuff in the Mexican-American War, so not exactly inspiring to me. See ya, sucker. Things I'm shocked by. Not unlike being a Tang audience member, the bridge of the sub was a mess of rancorous noise, albeit with more dispersed anger. Ego-rich leaders accusing other similarly large-headed leaders of mistakes, blaming one another for the failures of map clear-out that had so clearly occurred over the past games. Pedro looked about ready to sucker punch Guzmão. Al-Rahman was tearing up, minor forgotten leaders of the past were making the case for their relevance. Just about everything that shouldn't be brought up in a very tight, very personal space like an ultra-advanced nuclear sub. Minutes of debate turned to hours. The organizers of the Royale bounding across the room, setting out plans to fix things, and inevitably locking heads when they each demanded something else. Finally, a quiet settled, and an insistent cough brought Captain Nebuchadnezzar back to attention, away from his beloved game screens. Okay, Captain, we've done some digging, some negotiating, and we have a 30-page plan to remove all these relics of past games that shouldn't be here. It's been debated, Goguryeo carefully stated, before Lutilli Wadlin stepped in with characteristic aggression. First, we all agree, get rid of the failure in charge, he bluntly stated, causing Queen Maria in the corner to stir from a nap, mumble, okay, then slumber again. Then, we institute a global mind wipe using sleeping gas to come in and grab the artifacts and destroy any leftover sites, before resetting all calendars and clocks to make them think they jumped 40 years. Yeah, no, that sounds dumb, Captain Nebby interrupted. And I like these cameos. I say we do nothing. leaders en masse, do you like the chance to have even the slightest bit of attention again? He called out to the wider hall, away from the big leaders of each game. A rustle of activity swept through the crowd, followed by the unmistakable sound of at least 150 people lightly agreeing at once. See? Folks like it. Maria, keep doing the job. The sleeping queen didn't even move her head from the table, just throwing a thumbs up at the captain. The unseemly sound of passionate disagreement roared from the major leaders and former winners, and would have continued if not for a metallic knock at the door. The entire chamber aligned to see the two people entering the room. Salutations, compatriots in leadership. My name is Ainatu. I'm just settling in and thought an introduction would be a perfectly fine idea. Oh, forgive my manners. This is my former beloved wife. Her name is... And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for on this episode of the Civ Battle Royale X5. I have, to put it mildly, blabbed on plenty, so I'll leave you to peruse the map in peace. Have a wonderful week. Thank you for reading. And thank you for listening. I've been in Yokel. I've had a lovely time narrating for you, and I will see you next time.